sorry, I just realized that I was not screen or not recording. So if you're here, bonus for you. Anyway, and then we get down to residential. So if you have a lawn, runoff is finally, it's flipped, right? This is the point at which, you know, you've got more runoff than you do absorption or infiltration. And then of course, a parking lot, a street, a sidewalk, for every 3 inches of rainfall, that's all going to go someplace else. And that's just, you know, I keep using it as an example, but the pooter was a perfect example. You've cut down a lot of trees. Now, you understand, and I understand, that a single tree has the ability to filter and absorb thousands of gallons of rainwater, okay? So you cut down trees up the pooter, you have paved more, you've paved the sides, and you have made that river smaller, and you're also locked, you know, in that channel. And so not as much is getting absorbed by the trees, a lot more is running off. That's why it's so easy to flood, whether it's in the Big Thompson, you know, or whether it's in the Pooter River, and in so many other places too, where we have, you know, continued to develop. And development needs to keep places open. That's why it's so important that we learn to see wetlands differently, so that we're not paving over that or building a new neighborhood in these areas all the time, you know, so that we have some absorption. It's really important. So North America has 2 of the largest markets for bottled water. Obviously, water is very, very important to us. The United States and Mexico are 2 of those markets. And a good thing to know for the test, 29% of the world's packaged water market, just between the United States and Mexico. And of course, you know, there's an annual growth rate here for places because of more people, because of less water in other places, because of, you name it, all sorts of reasons. So consumption, 15.6% growth in 5 years. That's doubling every 4.5 years. If we look, you know, between 2003, 2008, what's the growth rate of that market, and looking at that. And of course, you know, there's been a lot of protests. There's a lot of ethical considerations that are not being looked at, a lot of human rights violations in Mexico when it comes to Coke and their hold on the water industry there, how much they own worldwide. Really, they're very involved with Nestle as well, privatization of water and holding water rights. And I think in some places, it's cheaper to get a Coke than it is, you know, to be able to even have access for water. So they're using millions and millions of gallons, you know, and so shortages at the point of, and then of course they're exporting that, right? So they're sending that clean water away, and many people in those areas are relying on, you know, very unsafe sources of water. All right. So we did look at this a little bit. I think it's good to have that Penn and Teller water piece. Oh, so the other day I showed the Penn and Teller thing. I uploaded the video. It immediately flagged it for copyright. And then it gave me an option. So you know, of course it's educational uses, but there's like, that's not an excuse for like the copyright or getting around the copyright, even though my channel is not monetized. I'm not making any money from this. So there was an option to trim it. And I did that, but then it still did not make the video available. So sorry if you missed it. Of course, online in modules is this, you know, PowerPoint, but the lecture, at least that part of it, if it trimmed it right, and I'll go back in and see because it's still there. And I selected that option, see if I can't get that posted for everybody. But it's a Penn and Teller piece for the show Bullshit. It's on Amazon, it's on Prime if you missed that. And it looked at this, right? So bottled water, far more expensive. We know up to 40% or more. And it comes from tap water. These were all places, whether it was Everest or Glacier or Descent, you name it, right? These are from municipal water sources, which is just whatever comes out of your faucet. Now, most of us, as we polled last class period, are used to that. And that's where most folks are getting their water from. At least 38 different pollutants, including bacteria, fertilizer, then pharmaceuticals, industrial chemicals, all found in 10 of the US major brands, or the 10 major US brands of water. And you cannot say like, our water is good water. Like the city of Fort Collins cannot actually legally say, we've got great water. You can be proud of it. You can be proud of your water sanitation and your filtration. But if you suggest, you know, that or the opposite, litigation is almost certain, right? If you say your city water is better or safer, this or that or the other, these bottled water companies and industries that own and privatize water, Nestle and other ones, um, you know, are going to be involved. So it's kind of like that rule where you can't take pictures of CAFOs like in Greeley. Like if you're going and trying to take pictures of the conditions there, even if you're not on property and they find out, you can be sued for that. Companies do this, of course, because of less liability and less transparency, right? That is so upsetting. Accountability is absolutely it is. So of course it takes 3 liters to make one oftentimes by the time you're doing shipping, by the time you're bottling it, by the time you're using the plastic. And of course you're taking water for soda, like I mentioned, you're import or exporting that out of the country. And in a way, right, it's this notion that we can shop our ways to safety. And we can, if you have money, if you have a bit of privilege, and I'm one of these people, right? Like I primarily buy organic food, local food. I try and do that. It costs a little extra money. That's a privilege. And it is a way that we can shop our, or think that we're shopping our way to safety, right? Bottled water, home air purifiers, different level of food. And I think that, you know, capitalism is, you know, is our sort of way that we go about things here in this culture. But, you know, the free market isn't free. And offering up consumer-based solutions really only works for people that can afford them. For other populations of people, you're stuck in Flint, Michigan, and in other places with water that'll harm you or kill you for years and years and years and years, so much so that the government just says, yeah, we're going to ignore that. Like, not as a conspiracy thing, just we're done dealing with you in this scenario and situation. And that is why on the previous slides, I'm saying access, power, you know, who's in dominant culture, who's not, what are these determinants, and why do people with less access and power and people of color and rural communities, why do they have worse water quality? Why are their health statistics, you know, alarming in many cases? All right, so privatization, that brings us to, and this can be in any industry, really. We're not just talking about privatization within a water industry, right? So know the term neoliberalism, right? A theory, political, and economic practices. We have to understand that this doesn't always, you know, saying that it exists doesn't always mean that it's true or workable for human beings, but proposes that human well-being can be advanced through liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms, so deregulation, right? And skills within an institutional framework characterized by strong private property rights, free market, and free trade. And of course, those terms, like I said before, are a bit misleading. Um, and this approach elevates free enterprise above everything else. But now, and actually, right within a few weeks, we have the perfect example of this. Texas deregulates its energy grid. What's the impact on human beings? Well, it's drastic. It's life and death. People don't have clean water. Some people froze to death. And a lot of people without power and access of basic needs. This did not have to happen. It did not happen in 49 other states, to my knowledge. This is, I think, a classic example of deregulation and privatization, and hollowing out state, you know, sort of ability to do that by eliminating regulations. And of course, eliminating regulations historically not proven to be good for folks, proven to be very profitable, but not fantastic for the people that it impacts. Food is less safe, water is less safe. And how do we know this? What am I saying by that? Well, you look like, take the poultry industry. You know, you've got massive amounts of safety recalls. You have people that are running these poultry farms that are getting sick themselves. You know, we could look at oil and gas. The same thing is true. And a market can't regulate it because, or it can't succeed in these goals, and not because that's some liberal thing and I just say you can't, but because you have to figure in human beings into it. And when you do, and we look at it like that, right, you understand. So I just have a few things here. Would you trust an industry more or less that self-regulates? And they're proposing this for all sorts of industries. And I think they're now, the poultry industry might be massively deregulated because now they're shipping a lot of the poultry, they're growing it here, now they're shipping it to places like China to be processed and then shipping it back. So massive also amounts of water footprints and of virtual footprints and of energy and things like that. Those are some cute chickens though. Would you trust an industry more or less that self-regulates? I don't believe I actually asked this question, but you know, Waterworld, it's not just a bad movie anymore. If you really want to see a bad movie, Waterworld would be that movie. Kevin Costner movie. But market environmentalism, right? Emphasizing markets as a solution to environmental problems. And it's just, we're just not seeing that that's the case. We're not seeing that markets can fix these issues. Strengthening private property rights to things like water, relying on markets for allocation of resources. I mean, different people have different access, and other people will have resources allocated to them based on privilege, based on economic standing, based on all sorts of things, right? Leading to less environmental degradation and more sustainable use of resources. That does not necessarily happen. When we look at water privatization, I can't take as much time as I would like to, but that Blue Gold documentary does do a very good job of talking about that, as well as the World Bank and the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and their impact on water, right? And one of the resistance, or one of the points of resistance, comes from the thought that, I mean, this is not like any other commodity. It's not the difference between chickens and pigs. It is, irreplaceable. It is finite. And again, privatization and market environmentalism, it's failing us because it really does leave things like access, whether you get it at all, and sanitation. I'm just going to take those two off the top because they're easy, they're in your face, and they make a difference if you don't have access to it or if it's not sanitary. And it leaves that to market mechanisms, and that is simply not what markets are designed to do. So if we leave it to that, then people get left out of the equation, and all sorts of people, and people that are at risk. And if we look at it, and if we continue to do water this way, in the way that we're doing now, we're looking at a future really of two different water worlds. And one is affluent nations, and maybe you can sigh of relief briefly because we're in that nation, but that and the rest of the world. And I think that most people in my classes are not like that, and they understand that it's important to have access, especially to food and water, right? If we're not talking about like access to a new Apple computer or whatever. So in affluent nations, a lot of the water is publicly funded. It's not for corporations. They're looking at market advantage and subsidies and what could they do about that. In the rest of the world, it's just there's no choice but private water or a hole in the ground. And quite literally, right? And these companies are coming in and building desalination plants, and they've got little, places for your card or for you to input your info, and it takes a certain amount of money out, but people can't pay for that water. So you're spending tens of millions or hundreds of millions to build these places to bring water to people that can't afford it. I'm not a business major, but I know that that's not workable, and it's not sustainable, not in a mental, like, how I want it to be, but in an economic sense, right? It's not good business. So to ensure this, developing countries are unable to borrow, right, from the World Bank or the IMF without having a domestic water privatization policy. We're not going to loan you money for that unless you privatize. So a lot of this globally right now thrives under these economic threats that continue. Conforming to loan conditions at high interest rates, or just simply being able to shut off people's water. And again, the number of how much you will pay or what you will do to get access to water is pretty much everything when it comes down to it. And of course, these are not easy to do things. These come with a lot of legal strings attached, banking strings attached, things like that. All right. Talking about this in Sao Paulo, really interesting, middle of the rainforest without water. I think it's important. It's from a ways back, but go ahead and click on it later. Check it out. Just a reason of interest. One of my best friends, Rafael, is from Manaus. And this is, an area that most people, again, are like, wow, why would they have a water shortage there? So I think this is a way to bring it sort of more outside of just this country. All right, so private approaches are failing. Again, and I mentioned this, but look, you can't be a profit-seeking firm and expanded these in the middle of no place, powerless, no access, very poor populations that can't pay. So, you know, the company comes in and promises to save these people, but the water firms are failing, the contracts are ever changing, the definitions are changing. And I mean, all of a sudden the private water companies come in, they're selling it for more, right, than the public municipality to ensure profits. And then the public municipalities are having water shortages. These are water wars. It's not a metaphor necessarily anymore. And of course, it's counterintuitive and counterproductive. And the price discrepancy, and we talked about that before, between the rich and poor countries, I think is unacceptable on a moral level. Particularly, again, we're not on our high horse for a piece of technology here. We're talking about universal access to the one irreplaceable substance that we may have. Now, we can take a look at this. You know, many import food not because of a lack of water, but sufficient arable land for cultivation. If we look at these places, I'm going to kind of get past this, but we are currently growing food in places in the world that are water insecure and in drought and famine conditions, and then export that food back to our country while we're growing it in front of people who are suffering. Right? So we have to look at not just the shortage of water, but what does that ability to have arable land look like? And again, because of the way that we're watering, because of the way that we're farming, because of the pesticides, because of ignoring the bits of biodiversity that are really important, we have less and less and less arable land every year and soil with which to work, right? All right. So kind of take a look at climate change and water just briefly. So obviously there is a greater, not Rick, I think Rick James, there's a greater risk of flooding. Groundwater is something that is a cause for concern for us because, like I have mentioned before, rates of recharge are not predictable. How much is there now is unknown. What access we have to aquifers and how long we can pump. But water rights, again, people in this class have taken an entire semester all about water and water rights. But some water rights dictate, right, that if you don't use it, you lose it. Like if I use this to kind of like make it really simple. But let's say our department, right, gets like $10,000 to buy paper clips with every year, right? And pencils and pens and resources for students. If we don't spend that money this year on every single dollar of it, will we have that money available to us next year? No. Like, no, that was your money for that point in time. If you didn't use it, you lose it. So when we apply that same notion to water rights, there's a lot of folks that are pumping millions of gallons out on fields that don't have anything, because to maintain their water rights, they have to use it. So again, a big piece of this is going to be a legislative piece that re-examines completely how we use and misuse water, so that we don't find ourselves in these extremes, right? Groundwater, the demand is growing for groundwater. I know that because people have come down my driveway, called me, talked to me, not just in rural areas. It's the subject of county commissioner planning meetings around here, and so many new ways that they're building, right? And so many new, I guess, subdivisions that they're trying to figure out how to get water to, that they've already built a subdivision for. So it's happening, right? Higher temps, of course, are going to increase evaporation. And salinization, that's that piece where you see that white salt buildup, right? Because you've just been watering while it's evaporating, and it happens so fast, you get that. And of course, the quality of your soil is degraded from there too. So we're seeing bacterial algae blooms, increase in soil erosion rates. Again, we're not getting more arable land just because we farm with modern techniques and modern machinery doesn't mean we're saving the soil. So that's why we have less and less arable land. I mean, certainly we're building things like that as well too. There's less and less places to farm. And a lot of farming is being forced indoors because of temperatures, because of droughts. So people are trying to learn how to grow food. And I should say, and using water. And I just read, I think yesterday, that backyard gardens have tripled over the last year, right? Which was apparent to anybody who's trying to get seeds, anybody who's trying to get chickens and do that thing for the first time. A lot of those were sold out. So that's because more people are trying to do that and have their food supply closer to home. So obviously that's a concern as well too. Increase the water demand in our agricultural sector, increase in hotter cities, but really it's not just that it's increased. Like I said, it's the way in which we are irrigating, where we are having a massive amount, more than half of our water is just evaporating. So there are ways to do it smart, and there are ways where we're going to lose a lot of that. Is water something to which we all have a fundamental human right to? Let me, Arizona recently moved in a conservation plan, gets rid of its use it or lose it, which is a big step. Oh, I love it. Please forward that to my email. Yes, and look, I just, one of the reasons I love sociology is because people are interesting and unpredictable. And, you know, we hate legislation and we hate laws, but if you're going to save water and save land and preserve biodiversity and make a better world, part of that is not just going to have to be in your backyard. It's going to have to be by making laws and protecting things and setting standards. And yeah, that makes us uncomfortable, but we can, you know, we're going to have to get over that comfortable, cultural uncomfortability piece to get to the real business, right? All right. So is water something to which we have a universal right? I believe I asked this question here. We never get full agreement, I don't think. I told you at the beginning of the semester, maybe it happened once, something like that. But 62 yes and 2 no. So we're in massive amounts of agreement. So why? Is water something to which we all have a fundamental human right to? Why or why not?
I'm more in the camp of like there isn't such thing as fundamental human rights.
Sure.
If rights are really just things are just agreements where you trade your ability to do something for benefits of a society.
All right. Great. Yeah, I think that's a good consideration in all of this. Who else?
I kind of agree with that in the sense that I said, yes, it does need to be, or it is a universal human right, because it's, you know, it's a need. Like we can't live without water. Whereas like a lot of the other rights that a lot of people see as universal human rights, technically we could live without, but for water and, you know, food, it's kind of like, you know, if you don't have it for a couple days, you're gonna die. So instead of phrasing it in the word of right, I kind of agree with the sense of just phrasing it as just a universal human need. But because of that, yeah, it needs to be a universal human right, I guess.
Good. I like that. I appreciate that perspective. Who else? Because I think this isn't as, you know, simple of a question, even though it seems to be, right? Because accomplishing that is also sort of inherent in this question, you know, that we could, or how could we accomplish this? Other thoughts about that? Right. All right. Let me move on here. Uncle. Nobody's outside, buddy. You're a good boy. Just be quiet. Sorry. All right. All right. So solutions, right? I think solutions for water change or involve changing the way that we think about water, right? Like completely reframing the idea for water. First of all, if you ever walk up to the sink and dump your water out, that was by your bed overnight or something down that sink. Don't do it. Right? So from just every day how we interact with water, there's a chance that that water can be used for a plant, the yard outside your window, a dog, you know, chickens, whatever. But we can no longer see water like we see water. Now, you know that after this chapter. I know you know that. I know that. We know that. I don't think that that's true necessarily, even with the rest of folks on campus, because in this culture, we haven't thought about it. So, you know, the major human rights treaty involving water is this International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And it recognizes that the human right to water is indispensable for leading a life of human dignity. And it's a prerequisite for the realization of other human rights. If you know, if you don't have water, you don't have anything else. So it is a prerequisite. Okay. So according to the treaty, human right to water entitles everyone to this. So yes, people have gotten together. They've said, yes, it's right. How do we accomplish this? It has to be sufficient. It has to be enough. It has to be safe. There has to be an acceptable way to get it to folks. It has to be physically accessible. And again, many countries, many countries in many places, because of all that urban sprawl, I mean, they're bringing a water truck into places and distributing water, and many people aren't even getting it, right? So there is no expectation, and it has to be affordable. But of course, the meanings of these terms are unclear. And you know, how are we gonna have to limit the right to water? And how do we define basic needs? And how do we make sure that in so many places where the water is not safe, that it is, right? So how do we translate that into sort of a specific volume? 3 to 5 liters a day is the absolute minimum for human survival, right? And of course, your well-being, your physical health and well-being, mental health and well-being, spiritual health and well-being is increased at around 20 liters a day. So for maximum, right? I mean, the UN is saying 20 to 40 liters per day a person. Can you imagine if it was limited to 3 or less, or 3 to 5 liters every other day, right? Which can very much be the case. It improves sanitary conditions, your well-being is improved. And people are going to go further, of course, and say, you know, you need even more water than that to be able to accomplish your most basic needs. And it's a right, of course, but it's not free. So it's got to be more than just an economic good. If we're going to change the definition around water and the behavior, right? You can change the definition all day long. We know as sociologists that the challenge is to change the behavior. So we've got to make it a social good as well. It cannot simply be an economic good. It's got to be involved with human rights. It's got to be involved with equality and justice. And it's not as an easy fix, right? I mean, it's just not a simple, this is a very complicated, oh, it's water. Seems easy till we really look at the dynamics surrounding it in 2021, okay? So oftentimes you can't choose which water you want. There are massive social and political costs, a lot of subsidies. How do we make this happen? All right. If we're going to view it as a good, you know, one of the things that we're going to hear is water should be priced at whatever the market can bear. But that just got people like a $60,000 or between $9,000 and $60,000 electric bills in just a few days. That's whatever the market can bear is not the way to go. It is going to impact negatively rural populations. Urban poop populations. That is not right. That is a unfortunate typo. But people that can't pay to play just aren't going to get water. So you cannot leave it to the free market if having people having a basic minimum clean reliable source of water to live is at all of interest or you know, important. So we've got to alter how we think about water, but we've got to alter a lot of the structures that stand in the way to universal water access. We've got to look at the dealings with World Bank and the IMF. We've got to look at cultural components, and we have to understand that less than 1% of the world's water is fresh water, and less than that is drinkable. I mean, I honestly, you really don't need a whole lot more convincing than that right there, I would say. I mean, we really, can you imagine if we even had 5% of this water, of the water on Earth available to us, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Like, we really wouldn't. But less than 1% and less than that is actually usable. So here we are having this conversation and having it be really important. Can we see the dog? Huckle, Huckle, hey.
When you say that we need that much water per day, is that like for all of our uses, including food?
Yes.
Okay, because that seemed a bit extreme for like drinking water or whatever.
Yeah. You would at least be well hydrated, right? Absolutely. Good question. We need to figure out how to cheaply sanitize ocean water. I mean, that is absolutely our challenge right now for I think for humanity. And I would say that maybe we should get Paul Stamets on this, right? But I would say that desalination is energy inefficient, expensive, dirty. Desal is not it. It's not it. And many people already realize that, and they're looking for many other solutions. But for now, we are certainly we're not there yet, you know. And I know that they're looking at sci-fi type things that are somewhat usable, moisture evaporators, things that you actually heard of, like in Star Wars or Aliens or things like that. Anyway, obviously we've got to have those type of solutions, but I think most of our solutions are on this pragmatic level, right? Change the water laws so that you don't have to use it all or you lose it. Don't inject dirty water from fracking and other industry back into aquifers and well waters. Yeah, like appropriately educate people about home. Think of it. Nobody right now that I'm aware of is using gray water here. I mean, or in Fort Collins, and I know in some places, but we're well past that. We all need to have gray water systems now, like 10 years ago. And again, that's another very pragmatic, easy approach that can get you where you need to be, with saving water, with more quality water, with preserving that. So I think a lot of solutions. I do have a meeting that starts shortly that I could not avoid. So I think we're done. That's my last slide. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Part of this was not recorded. I'm sorry about that, but the PowerPoint is up for this chapter. This test is only going to be 2 chapters. So I think that that is a benefit to everybody because, you know, we can study that instead of, you know, a whole nother chapter on top of it. All right. You are all welcome. You're super kind. I love you all. Be good people, do good things, mask up, be safe. And I will see you on Tuesday. Peace, everybody. Bye.
Wait, when is the test? Is this coming Monday, right?
I believe the test is next Friday,
Okay.
the 11th or 12th.
See ya.
And it's open for a little more than 24 hours.